Well, hey guys, if we've never met before, my name is Aaron Kroll. I get to serve here on the Northview staff as the family ministry pastor. Absolutely love being on this team and excited to continue our conversation on trust versus suspicion. And so today, really what I want to do is give you a little bit of a framework to think through of what trust actually looks like practically played out on a team. And my hope is that we could even come out of this with some shared language that we can use moving forward as well. So like I said, it's a visualization, so go with me here. I'm excited. Let's just jump right in. So we're going to start with reality, all right? And we're going to define terms here too as we go. So reality, when you think of reality, think of the experiences you have, the things that you do, see, and experience on a day-to-day basis. It's the conversation you have with a coworker, the body language you observe at the grocery store, or maybe the news segment you watch during your lunch break, right? Those things actually happen. They're experiences that you have every day. Then you have perception. Perception will go right over here. Perception is kind of what it sounds like. It's the way we perceive that reality, those things that happen, those experiences we have every single day. It's the emotions we feel around them. So it's feeling encouraged after that conversation with a coworker, or maybe a little bit concerned when you see the way that the customer is treating the employee at line at the grocery store, or maybe we can all relate to feeling a little frustrated after watching that news cycle during your lunch break, right? And so we have both these things that we experience every day, all the time as we're walking through life. And within these two things, a cycle starts to form. That's really important and really common. And it's called learning, right? This is how we go about our day-to-day lives, and this is how we learn. We experience things, they happen, we perceive them, and then those perceptions of the reality then inform our reality and our experiences going forward. So for example, if you really enjoyed that conversation with a coworker, next time you see him, go, hey, I want to strike up another conversation with him. Or after seeing what happened in line in the grocery store, maybe you are extra conscious of showing appreciation and gratitude to the employees there. Or maybe you decide, you know what, I need to be a little more discerning on what news stations that I listen to or read, and maybe even when I watch the news, right? That is learning. That's how each one of us learn and grow. But within the normal, good learning cycle, an unhealthy cycle can start to form, and that's really what I want to focus in on today. And it's something called the mischief cycle. Again, within the learning cycle, something called the mischief cycle can start. And mischief is a consistently negative view of a person or organization based on your negative perception of an experience that you had with them. That's what mischief is. Then that mischief, that negative perception, goes on to inform future realities. Let me give you some like an example real quick. Let's say it's Monday morning, you go to work, and you had the most hilarious family lunch that previous Sunday, the day before. And so you go right up to your coworker and you're like, you will not believe what happened. You start telling them the whole story of this hilarious thing that happens, and you realize halfway through the conversation, you notice a couple things. For one thing, your coworker is not really making eye contact the whole time. They aren't really laughing along when you're saying something funny, and maybe they even check their phone or their watch a couple times in the conversation. At the end of the conversation, they give what feels like a pity laugh, and then they move right along. Well, that really happened, right? That interaction happened. Your perception of that interaction is, let's just say your perception is, you know what? It seems like that person doesn't care about me, and it seems like they're kind of a jerk. Then a mischief cycle is when you allow that perception to then go forward and inform your reality and your experiences with that person moving forward. So a mischief cycle does have tons of practical implications. For example, the most obvious one might be that going forward, next time something exciting happens in your life, you're not going to go to that coworker and tell them, because clearly, like you think, they don't care about you and they're kind of a jerk, right? But it can also come out in other ways too. It can permeate even further, right? Maybe you get a very concise email from them, and instead of feeling like it was concise, it comes off as short and dismissive, right? Or maybe you reach out to them because you're collaborating on a project and you're seeing if they can help you with something, and they reply with the infamous yes, period, right? We all know that a one-word text with just a period from the wrong person can get interpreted in the wrong way. And so you see that text, you're like, see, I knew it. They didn't want to work with me in the first place. They don't really want to help me. They're just tolerating me because they don't care about me and they're a jerk. That is a mischief cycle. In a couple ways, I want to give you a couple practical ways that you can identify and tell when you're in a mischief cycle. First of all, if your interpretation of another person's motivations tend to be negative, you probably have a mischief cycle, right? Like, we don't know what people are thinking, we don't know their motivation, but if there's someone that you tend to have a negative perception of their motivations, you fill in that gap negatively, well, you probably have a mischief cycle with them. Another one would be if you tend to have hypothetical dialogue with another person. We all do it, right? Like, man, I would say this, or like, man, I really want to say this to them, and what would they say back? So you're having this dialogue in your head, and that tends to go really poorly in your head. You probably have a mischief cycle going with them. And then another way to think about it is just if there's someone that cannot get a win in your mind, like even when they do something good and they do the right thing, you fill in wrong motivations, you think, yeah, they couldn't have really meant it. Well, you probably have a mischief cycle going with them. I want you to think even right now, is there someone in that category for you? Do you have a mischief cycle going with one of your coworkers here at Northview right now? So what do we do? What does it look like to break the mischief cycle? How do we get out of it? Well, it takes something really important called context. Context is going directly to the person and seeking out the why behind the negative experience or reality. All right, so that's what it looks like. And we, as employees of Northview, and really, let me just say too, this goes way beyond just your work, right? This is good for your marriage, it's good for your relationship with your friends, it's good for your family, it's good, like, this can be applied everywhere. What we need to do when we recognize we have a mischief cycle going with someone is we go to them and we extend them trust. And right here is a practical application of trust, is when we go and seek out context. And what's really cool, actually, in an upcoming session, I'm really excited, Derek Irvin's going to do a deep dive into what these conversations look like, how to really win in these types of conversations. But I'll at least throw this out there. For one thing, there's a misconception that when you want to, or when you're supposed to extend trust to somebody, that you should not have a conversation, not bring things up, right? It's like, well, we had this bad experience, but I guess I'm supposed to extend trust, so I just won't say anything. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that actually happens when you don't trust somebody. Instead, extending trust is choosing, yes, I will have this conversation, and even though it doesn't mean you don't have a conversation, it does inform, extending trust does inform how you have the conversation, right? So always root these conversations in reality. Don't go to them, like in our example, don't go to them and say, hey, why don't you care about me and why are you such a jerk, right? Like, go to them instead and say, hey, we had a tough interaction on Monday and it made me feel this way. Could you help me understand why? And that's what it looks like to see context. It's saying, it's assuming, you know what, my perception that they don't care about me and they're a jerk probably isn't the full reality. There's probably some things that I'm missing. And so that's what it looks like to go and to lean in. And so again, like I said, excited for Derek to dive into that more. For now, let's talk about what happens when you seek out context, all right? And basically, one of four things happen when you seek out a context conversation. The first one is, I'd say, happens about maybe 1% of the time, and I'll say at Northview it should happen 0% of the time. But every once in a while, maybe you approach that person and you say, hey, we had this tough interaction on Monday. It makes me feel like you don't really care about me. And maybe they say, well, yeah, it's because I don't care about you and your stupid family, right? Like, maybe your mischief cycle is 100% accurate, right? Like, maybe that's the case. Again, it rarely happens, and at Northview, I'd say it should never happen, right? So let's talk about the other 3 times, because these are really important. The first one is that maybe you share that with them and they say, oh man, you know what? I had no idea how my actions were being perceived, and I had no intention of making you feel that way, and so I am so sorry, and I'm gonna do better next time. What just happened? Well, you were given an apology. The person owned up and said, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm gonna do better next time. And what happens is that breaks the mischief cycle, right? It gives you more information. You realize, oh, you know what, they're actually sorry about that and they're gonna do better. Another one, this is a really important one. Another thing that could happen is they say, you know what, I remember that conversation and I'm so sorry. That morning, my wife and I had a really tough morning getting the kids ready for school. And actually right before you came in, she sent me a text telling me that her dad's blood work came back from that test last week and they did not get good results. And so I was just not in a good place. And so, but I am sorry, I didn't mean for that to impact our conversation. What happens there? Well, you realize that your coworker happens to also be a human being, right? With tons of things going on and they're complex. And so there's more going on than you realize. Or the third thing that can happen, and this is the most humbling one, is they could come back and say, you know what, I do remember that interaction. And to be honest, it was kind of a tough one. I had a deadline that I was trying to meet. And the fact that you just walked up to me and assumed I had nothing going on and started telling the story, I was really distracted. And so maybe next time, if you could just make sure that I've got time to talk, that would be really, really helpful. And what you realize there is that, you know what, I painted myself to be the complete victim in this situation, but actually I might have something that I have to apologize for as well. In all 3 of the circumstances, It breaks the mischief cycle because now context is informing your reality going forward and not your limited perspective with the limited knowledge you have. And what that does is it forms a new cycle where now context and more information informs your reality going forward, again, rather than your limited perspective. And guys, could you just think about what it would look like if we all leaned into this? Because the thing is, mischief is so incredibly damaging to a culture and to a team. It can be so incredibly damaging if we all just walk around assuming that our perceptions and assumptions are just spot on. It makes for a toxic work environment. It truly does. And I know this is like a fancy diagram and all that, but let's also just pause for a second and remember that this is a practical application of Matthew 18. When Jesus calls us that, when someone sins against us, when we have tension against another person, we need to go to them first. So let's also not overcomplicate all of this. Let's remember it's what Jesus calls us to do. Okay, I'm going to close with this one last point, and then I would love for you to jump into some discussions here. So context is the way we rise above the mischief cycle going on in our heads, right? This is the way we as a team can rise above it. Unfortunately, there is a way that you can actually sink even lower below a mischief cycle. Some of you might be tracking with me here on what I'm talking about, but it's a little something called gossip, right? Gossip is when you take your mischief cycle, your perception, negative perception of an experience you have with someone, and you invite other people into your mischief cycle. And what happens there is now there's a group of people whose perception of another person or maybe an organization is determined not from actual experiences that they had with the person, but it's based on your perception of a negative experience you have with them, and you've now invited others into your mischief. And what it does is it informs their reality going forward with that person. What that looks like is when there's a whole group of people at an organization that says, oh yeah, that guy doesn't care about anyone but himself, he's such a jerk. And guys, I know we need to know this at this point, but gossip and a healthy team cannot coexist. They are terrible roommates. They do not get along. And so we as a culture, we need to be actively anti-gossip. That's what we need to be as a team, is we are anti-gossip. We just want nothing to do with it. So I hope that this prompts some really great conversations with you all. Know that I absolutely love being a part of this team, and I love each and every one of you. So thank you so much for your time, and enjoy conversations.